I'm Mr. Tom, and I like to paint silly things. Welcome to Acutely Believable Creatures. Hello friends and homies, today we got a good one. This prompt comes from my creative friends on Discord from our weekly art review. This week's theme is Golem, which, for those not in the know, a golem is an animated anthropomorphic being in Jewish folklore. It's usually inanimate matter, clay or mud, but since I can't think of anything other than Clayface from Batman, I'm going to try some other materials, starting with this adorable pile of rocks. I like to keep the initial sketch loosey and goosey, and some basic shapes and outlines. I know I want to keep this one pretty thick and husky, but also maintain some goofy and uncoordinated charm. I want each of its parts to look like they came from different rock collections, sort of like a community collage project, but I'm not quite 100% sold on this robust rock formation just yet. I like where this one is heading, but it's always good to sketch out all of your ideas just to be sure. Let's darken some lines here and there, add some squiggly bits, and drop in some loose shading for good measure before we move on to the next one. There's something about this arm that doesn't sit right with me, but I can always go back and later and mess with it. Oh, and I know they're supposed to be made up of inanimate objects, but I can't help but want to put a little foliage on them. Okay, he's looking rocky enough. Let's try a new thing. This one is more of a traditional golem based on some illustrations I found on Pinterest, which is an awesome source for reference material. It's definitely more curvy and uniform, like a skilled craftsman sculpted it and set it loose into the world. But it also kind of looks like an old school scuba helmet meets a wood fire pizza oven with a smooth brick-like body. It meets the golem criteria, but it lacks that certain je ne sais quoi. So let's try this one more time. I thought a tree stump might look cool with some dangly, grabbly tentacle roots to drag itself around. I really like the look and textures of tree barks and the thought of a stumpy tree creature crawling around swiping at your ankles. But a golem is meant to be made of inanimate stuff, and trees are living things, so this kind of feels a little bit like cheating. Kinda cute, but cheating. Okay, so we have 3 contestants and each of them have their merits, but one stands out to me the most. Sketch numero uno. I feel like the sketch is a 10, but it's got a wonky arm that doesn't really make sense. So I'm going to mess with it. This is sometimes the most frustrating part of the process, feeling like you're right there, but just can't get that one tiny detail right and it's holding you up, and for me it's this arm. I don't like it up front, it makes him kind of feel like an ape. Waving seems adorable, but very unrock-like. Off to the side feels kinda like it takes the visual weight off of it. but slightly behind the body, kind of dragging the arm along as it moves down the road. Yes, please. And I know what you're thinking. Isn't this almost exactly like it was in the beginning? Yup. Could I have just edited this part out? Yup. But I think it's kind of important to see the artistic process and know that messing up and second guessing is something that most creatives deal with. Now that that arm thing is dealt with, we just have to transfer our sketch to watercolor paper using our trusty lightbox and some tape. Now, watercolor paper is one of the only art supplies I don't mind spending a little extra on. This is Arch's 140-pound cold pressed paper, and I can't recommend it enough. I love it. Now, remember, line weight does not matter at this point. The important part in this step is to keep our lines clean and light. They will show through our watercolors, so I'm only adding lines where I know that I'll be inking later. Also, nothing I've used thus far is anything special. The sketches were done on the same paper that I filled my kids' binders and folders with, and the pencil here is nothing more than a regular number 2 pencil that we all know and love. While the tape party's going on, I just want to point out one of my favorite things in the world. This board came from my dad's workshop. I was never any good at wood projects like he was, but I've used this and a couple other pieces like it for years to make most of my paintings. And I gotta think that old bear of mine would have approved. Now, I like to set the stage before I start painting and gather up everything I'll need. Paints and brushes, obviously, my clean water and dirty water jars, and a little strip of scrap paper just to test any colors I might concoct. Okay, since I want all of its parts to look like they came from different sources, I can't wash the whole thing and dab color in. That would make it look too uniform. Instead, I'm going to paint each body part separately with different shades of gray, some burnt umbers, and transparent blacks. I'm going to start up top because I think his big, thickly head is going to be the focal point, and if I'm going to mess up, I'd rather mess up early. So I would do the scary part first. This is something you'll see me do throughout the painting, dabbing in small amounts of colors to already wet areas. In my humble opinion, this is the true beauty of watercolors. As it dries and the colors mix, they produce some of the most beautiful gradients, and when they're done in the right proportions, they look really organic. I just want to take a moment and thank all 5 of my Patreons, who are all amazing and consist of 3 friends I know in real life, 1 person I met in the children's literature world, and one of the most wonderful human beings in the world, my mom. If you want to join this elite group of heroes and follow my mom's good example, consider joining us on Patreon, or Discord, or Instagram, or even doing that liking, commenting, and subscribing hot mess right here on YouTube. But for now, I'm going to continue this process, painting each body part until everything is sufficiently covered in paint. I want to add a little more character and interest to our new friend, who should have a name by now. I'm going to call him Pyle, but if you can think of a better name, let me know in the comments. I think a patch of moss would be a nice touch. It'll break up the grays, and maybe there's a caterpillar hitching a ride up there. I just like the idea of a tiny ecosystem happening on top. With the paint dry, it's line work time. Now, this may sound dumb, but I always start with the eyes. I know I only use 2 dots for eyes, but they're surprisingly easy to mess up. So I always try to do the hard stuff first, because I'd rather screw up sooner rather than later in the process. Now, there's a lot of chipping, sediment lines, and pebbles, so line weight's going to be pretty important. I'm using Sakura Micron fine liners. They're really common to find even in stationery stores, but the important part is that they're completely waterproof when they dry. All the little details get an 005 line, inside the details get an 02, and outside lines get an 05. Now, like I was saying before, line weight is really important in this step. Even though I'm only using 3 different sized pens, you can get a metric and standard ton of variety of lines just by varying the pressure of the pen tip and making some implied lines by lifting up the pen and then continuing the line further down the paper. Even though there won't be ink, the eye fills in the information, thus an implied line. Now, when I outline something, I outline it. My heaviest lines are always around the outsides of my characters. Now, this got me in trouble more times than I can count in art school, but look at me now, outlining everything with reckless abandon and no one to yell at me. Just a few more details here and there, and we should be done with our pen party. Occasionally, after the inking process, it can start to look a little flat. So before I take the tape off, I want to exaggerate some of the shadows that I put in before, and maybe add a little white here and there for some highlights. Dropping in shadows is actually pretty easy once you choose where your light source is coming from. In this case, it's just above Pyle's head, so we're going to darken up the areas under all the parts of him that stick out from his body. Like his armpits and arm joints, his upper body is the largest bit of him, so it'll cast a shadow on everything under it. And just push that right hand back behind his leg, I'm going to darken up that whole area too. Of course, his gaping maw needs a little more color too. I want it to look like it's a cross between a cave and a mouth. This is the final detail, and it's one that I don't always do. Even though I tried to make each part of him vary in cool grays, he's still looking more homogeneous than I'd like. So I'm going to add some white lines around the top areas of him and call it a day. Okay, shh. Listen carefully. When I was making short videos on other platforms, removing the tape was the most liked and watched stuff I ever made. And there you go. I love Pyle. He's the best Golem I've ever made. Thank you for watching and hanging out. I've got all the cool links in the description below, including where you might find your very own painting of Pyle. Hugs and high fives. Until next time, friends and homies. Be good and do good.